Welcome to the Pink Pill RX podcast, hosted by Katie and Jay Fillmore, where we navigate complex and thought-provoking subjects surrounding women with a focus on education. For shorter form content, follow us on TikTok at Caters88.
That is KATORS88.
If you enjoy this podcast, please give us a follow.
Okay, episode 4. We are live now.
Hooray.
Yeah, so I would like to open up by talking about power structures that just benefit very small groups of people over and over again. It just never stops because half the time we don't even want to acknowledge the power structure. Example given, the patriarchy.
Mm-hmm. You know, I've been thinking about that word because even in recent times, like it's created this kind of like knee-jerk reaction when you've used that word. And it's like I feel automatically like I'm your enemy somehow.
As
like
a
male.
You're my enemy.
Like Jay is Katie's enemy
Got
somehow
it.
because I'm a male. So when you use the word patriarchy, I immediately feel like defensive because I feel like you're viewing me as some type of enemy because of my gender.
Right.
So like, but I've been able to like reframe it. And I think that the way I've heard that word from you is not what you mean with that word. And instead we're defining it two different ways almost. Like for me, like I was defining it as patriarchy as like, oh, men are bad. And that's kind of like the vibe of it. When really the definition is more like almost like you're thinking that me as a male, like I'm actively trying to oppress you. But to me, it appears that it's a systematic thing. It's like the patriarchy is a system that men benefit from and don't dismantle. So it's like the patriarchy is a system that you are speaking against, not individual people necessarily that you're speaking against when you say patriarchy.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's just that men benefit from it. They don't stand up against it. It just continues.
Right. Can I unpack, like, for me, this was really helpful. Can I unpack a couple of like comparisons?
Oh, I would love you to.
So one is my background's in education. I taught for high school for 8 or 9 years before I went into real estate. And there is a system that has created this inequality in education regarding property taxes. So you have people, everybody pays property taxes on their home. It's a percentage of the home's value. And those property taxes go towards your county or your municipality. It goes towards things that your city needs and infrastructure. It goes towards the local school district and a bunch of other things. But the school district portion is a really big portion of your property tax bill, like usually the biggest portion. And that money only goes to the school district in which you live. So if you live in a district that is wealthier, that has properties that are worth more, you're paying more in property taxes. So you have more money going to your school district. Or if you live in a poorer community, your homes aren't valued as highly. So you're talking, $100,000 house versus a $400,000 house or something. So the property tax percent you're paying on $100,000, it's a smaller tax bill than the $400,000 house. So you have less money you're paying in property taxes that go towards your school. So your schools have less money to hire teachers, to pay teachers, for technology, for extracurriculars and things like that. So you have this natural inequality that comes about because schools are funded by property taxes, only the properties of the homes that are in that school's district. So in this example, like, are people that live in richer communities, like upper middle class and upper class people, are they actively trying to oppress lower class people or lower income people and make them have worse schools? No, they're not actively doing it. Are they passively allowing it to happen by not advocating and pushing for some type of reform? Yeah. There's a systematic problem with the funding of education that hurts people who are poorer. And so you have this wealth type of oppression that's going on. It's systematic. You don't have specifically doctors and accountants and lawyers that are trying to just, rob the poor school districts, but they're allowing it to happen. Now, and you could reform it. You could have like all the property taxes that are allocated for schools goes to a big pot for the state, and the state distributes it equally. And that's an example of what could be done. I'm not saying it's the only option or the best option, but you don't see a lot of people advocating for that who have wealthier schools because it will take money away from their schools. So like, that's one example. The other one is, I remember during Black Lives Matter that, everybody was saying all lives matter. Not everybody, but a lot of people who were white were saying all lives matter. Well, the thing that like I came to be educated about during that is that It's talking about a system of racial profiling that led to, or is leading to, staggering amounts of death and disproportionate amounts of death of black men. Am I, as a white man, am I actively killing or actively oppressing black men or black women? No. In this situation, I'm not a cop. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a lawmaker, right? But do I use the privilege of my more widely accepted voice to inform, educate, and advocate, to talk with friends and family? And if I don't, then I'm passively permitting this system to continue. And it's a systematic race issue. If you're not a part of the disadvantaged group, you have a more powerful voice when speaking about the disadvantaged group's issues because you're outside of the discrimination. Your voice is more widely accepted, and your voice is seen as being more objective because you don't have skin in the game. You're not being affected by the discrimination or the oppressive systems that are going on. You're viewed, more unbiased and stuff. So, like, for me as a man, my voice speaking about the oppression of women is very, very powerful. It's more powerful in a different way because I am not a woman, so I'm not being affected by the oppression. So I don't have that skin in the game. And men would see my voice as being less biased because I'm not part of the suffering. Not only just that, but they're like, I will be listened more by other men because we're in the same social group. And so if you need men to change the power structure, then men need to talk about it with other men. And systematic oppression's sneaky because you don't have to actively be oppressing, but you're passively allowing it to continue as you benefit from it. So it's sneakier than outright active discrimination or oppression and things like that.
Yeah, I would call it passive oppression.
That's a nice phrase to coin for that. Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's good.
Oh, I appreciate all of that a lot, and I think a lot of our listeners will also appreciate that. I'm going to tell you two more things. One is a story from a TED speaker. Mm-hmm. And this kind of goes back to what you were saying, like literally what you were saying. So she's talking about how she was drinking sangria at a party, talking to her friends, and a debate about women's rights came up. I was in a graduate program in women and gender studies. So this woman was in a graduate, okay? I argued what I know through scholarship and lived experiences to be true. I argued that this was all true. He, a close friend of mine, a good guy, disputed every single point that I said. Then something odd happened. Another man interjected, repeating the exact same points I had just made. The first man turned, made eye contact with him, and listened without interrupting him once. And then eventually began nodding and said, "Yes, exactly." The second man did not say anything distinctive. He did not introduce new points. He did not even phrase it much differently than I had. He was, however, respected, believed, and regarded. He was heard, and he was a male.
That happened to you. It was me and you at this theological Bible study, and you said something, and this dude went right past it. I said almost the exact same thing, like a minute or two later. And he said, "That was a good point, Jay."
It happened 2 or 3 times in that particular study.
Yeah.
So I need you to keep doing stuff like that because it's not even defending me. That's not what this is. When you speak up for your woman, it's not even defending them. It's raising the voice so that your woman can be heard.
Right. Like I needed your ideas and your words have to come out of my mouth to be listened to. So like I need to share your opinion when it's not being heard so that it is.
That is the power that you have to speak against the patriarchy. Women can scream it from the mountaintops. But without male voices, we are noise. We are white noise in the background.
Sadly, yeah.
I always in the back of my mind am running, like, why don't men believe that the patriarchy exists? Or why aren't men believing these stories from women? And why, like, and I think about like logical fallacies and defensiveness and all that stuff. But I found it, Jay. This is why. There's something called a credibility gap that women experience. And I think this is why men don't believe women. It's called the gender credibility gap. And the definition is that the gender credibility gap refers to the phenomenon in which women are not perceived to be as credible as their male counterparts. And in many ways, this gap is invisible and it's natural, and we've just accepted it as that's just life. And the first writings that they have read about it was from Aristotle in 350 BC, that women are more void of shame or self-respect. They have more false of speech and are more deceptive than men.
That's from Aristotle?
Yes. Okay, this is in our bones. This is in our epigenetics, baby. We don't believe women, essentially. So what's up with this credibility gap? Why is it there? How did it get there? Aside from the fact that men have been thinking like this since the beginning of time. Oh, spoiler alert, women think like this too. So on a global level, 90% of men and women have a gender bias towards women. That is negative.
Oh.
But we'll zoom it in here in a second.
Okay.
So why? Why does this happen? Well, you have the stereotypes of gender roles, which are traditional stereotypes that depict men as logical and competent, while women are seen more emotional and as like less reliable. And these stereotypes obviously influence the perception of credibility, which often lead to women being seen as less trustworthy because they're emotional, because they're reactive. And it basically is just a reflection of deep-seated biases that undermine women's authority and trustworthiness. But it impacts professional and personal life significantly because it isn't just that she's a woman, so she's dismissed, but it's that there's this presumption that she's dramatic, emotional, and irrational because of the way she appears in front of you. So the fact that you look like a woman, I'm automatically assigning these attributes to you.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you were a man that looked more female presenting, I wonder if that would impact your credibility. It probably would. I think we see this in the gay community.
That's interesting.
The more feminine somebody leans, the less credible they become.
Where does that come from?
Well, it's a psychological thing that has been built up over centuries and centuries and centuries. And so women are just dismissed. Now, there is theories like communication styles. Women are often judged more harshly for their communication styles. They have fewer acceptable strategies to like convey authority without facing backlash, which can diminish their perceived credibility.
Yeah.
And then there's also a theory called the role congruency theory. And this theory suggests that when women assume roles traditionally seen as masculine, such as an expert in an area or a leader, they face a backlash because they violate the gender role expectations. And the incongruency of that exasperates the gender biases in the credibility because it's like incongruent. Like, no, you're a woman. You're not leader, expert.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't jiving for my already myelinated pathways in my brain. So there must be something wrong with you. You're a bitch.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of Kamala and Hillary Clinton back in 2016. And I wonder this. I don't know if this is a controversial question or not. It just popped in my head. But do you think the broader population doesn't have a picture of what a leader looks like who is embodying feminine power? And we have female leaders who are just trying to embody masculine authority and masculine power when there's a distinct like female leadership specialness, but because the population it's a patriarchal system that female leaders have to kind of follow the pattern of what a masculine leader looks like versus what a woman leader looks like?
I mean, that's possible. I think I have some issues with a couple of kind of those points because I do think that empowered femininity can come across masculine, but I'm not really certain that it's masculine leadership.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that it's empowered femininity, and because it's empowered, it looks like it's masculine. Therefore, this credibility gap then comes into play.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's not the case. I do think some female leadership probably tries to imitate, but I do think that empowered femininity looks like masculinity to people.
I think you're right. I withdraw my question. I think you answered that well, and I think I'm good.
Okay. So let me just say, these are studies that are done, and I will link them in the podcast. I'll link them in my citations on TikTok, like I always do. But a jury experiences a male expert's witness testimony as more trustworthy than the testimony of a female expert. Okay, that is studied. That is a thing. So if you are ever in court, you want a male expert testifying for you, not a female expert.
Dang.
There's this perception of expertise that women experts are often evaluated less positively than equally qualified, even though they're equally qualified as male experts. And they are particularly evaluated less positively in fields that are stereotypically associated with masculine traits, such as politics. Justice system bias. I have always thought that men, in general, especially in family court situations, are discriminated against more than women. The data does not support that.
I thought that too.
The data does not support that. In fact, if men go for custody of children, sole custody or 50-50 custody, 93% of the time they will get it.
Holy crap.
Now that's over all the states. There are some states that that show preference to men, and there's some states that show preference to women. And you'd be surprised on what states show preference for who. Okay, so for women, the likelihood of women winning custody battles are notably higher in Tennessee, Utah, North Carolina, Michigan, and Arkansas. They tend to award custody. So Tennessee tends to award custody 78% of the time to the mom in a custody battle. So we're talking about an active custody battle.
Yeah.
Okay. Utah, 74% compared to 26% for fathers. But in Massachusetts, guess what? 92% of fathers who aggressively pursued custody received either full or joint custody.
Holy crap. That's when men go to bat and want it.
Yes. So men that go to bat and want it, they win custody in up to 93% of cases when they pursue it, including many abusive fathers. Mm-hmm. And part of that reason is because women are least believed when they are reporting sexual or domestic violence. And I'm going to get into that a little more deeply. Yeah, that's an important
point. I want to get into it. But so what percent of the time when women aggressively pursue, it's not 7%.
Women often face bias in custody disputes, with studies indicating they are awarded custody only 7% of the time when both parents contest.
Whoa. Oh my gosh.
We're talking about men that are pursuing custody aggressively with women.
Right.
Women will lose 93% of the time.
That is insane.
And again, that's overall, and it just depends on the state that you live in.
I wonder if we so believe the opposite because a large percentage of the time, men do not aggressively pursue full or 50-50 custody. And so you oftentimes see more divorced women that have full custody of their children. But if there is a dispute between the two, she only wins 7% of the time. They just don't pursue it a large percentage of the time.
I think that's possible. We could look up data about that.
Yeah.
But I also think it's this credibility gap. Women yelling and screaming from the rooftops that they're getting the shit beat out of them or that they've been being raped every night and not being believed.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't help the gender pay gap doesn't help. You can afford less of an attorney.
Exactly.
Okay. Less good attorney.
Yeah, exactly. So women's testimony, especially in the case of abuse or sexual harassment, are often discounted. And this meta-analysis that they did found that men are perceived as more honest than women, despite studies showing that men are slightly more deceptive than women.
That's what I would think, is that men would be slightly more.
Yeah. I want to read a follower story that has to do with the justice system. Okay, so this woman is talking about how she has received discrimination through the justice system, family, court justice system. First of all, she thanks us. She says, "Thank you for having these discussions. They are so important. I conceived my second child with my husband, now ex-husband, after he raped me one night. It took me 17 years to leave him. He was abusive to me and all 7 of our kids, and he made me terrified to leave. He gaslit me all the time, and when I finally did leave, the court granted him custody of my kids, despite the CPS reports of abuse, and he admitted it to a therapist. Our system is failing to protect us. Men know they can get away with it most of the time." And when I said, "Hey, is there anything specific you'd like me to talk about Or is there any other insight you can share with me concerning this topic that would be helpful for us? And she said, how about the number of restraining orders that were granted to women and were violated? Approximately 1/2 of the orders obtained by women against intimate partners who physically assaulted them were violated. Mine wasn't granted because we had kids together, and the father's rights are a big thing in California. California.
Whoa.
This was denied even though a CPS case had been open against him for abuse. He had to move out while the investigation was going on, so he moved in with his mom, who lived across the street. When he came into the house and refused to leave, I called the police. They told me that it was his house, and he had every right to be there, despite the CPS orders. One cop said that if it was him in the situation, and I quote, as the man of the house, I'd be pissed. Then they shook my ex-husband's hand and left. I was terrified. CPS closed the case because the kids lied to protect their dad, despite his own admission to a therapist. This is all too common in the US. The system doesn't act to protect victims. They protect the abusers. The data also so clearly verifies this. And I'm going to link the data she sent. So this is not just stuff she's just spouting off, speaking to the credibility gap for people who are listening.
Unbelievable. It's so, oh God, that is just, that story, like, when I hear stories like that, it makes me feel small and like, this is such a stacked deck. This is such a huge operation that is stacked against women, or whoever the victim in the particular situation is, if it's minority or if it's a poor person who can't afford an attorney. And I'm like, what in the world? What am I supposed to do? It makes you feel like hopeless, throw up my hands. But if I could, at least for any men who are listening, like, dude, what you can do is make sure that you believe the women in your life and that you, like, speak up for the women in your life when they are not heard.
Do you remember the Me Too movement? Obviously.
Yeah.
You remember the Me Too movement. And this whole push to believe women.
Mm-hmm.
I believe women, believe the woman,
yeah.
Believe women. It's just like the Black Lives Matter.
It's not saying don't believe men.
It's not saying don't believe men. But we have to start believing women. And there's data to support that we don't believe women.
We're not saying don't believe men. We're saying women are not being believed. Let's believe them. Like, I heard it said on the Black Lives Matter side, like, we're not saying white lives don't matter, but we're saying our lives are the ones that are in danger, so our lives need to be advocated for, that they matter.
So 51% of female attorneys reported and agreed to the statement that male judges appear to give more credibility to the statements or arguments of male attorneys versus female attorneys. So you want a male attorney. 13% of male attorneys also agreed with this statement. 29% of female responders agreed that female judges also appear to give more credibility to male than female attorneys. And when asked about witnesses, 27% of female attorneys agreed that male judges appeared to give more credibility to male witnesses than female witnesses, whereas the number was only 16% with female judges. So regardlessly, there's a bias towards men across the board: witnesses, experts, attorneys, defendants. You are down a rung if you aren't packing the right thing between your legs.
Mm-hmm.
And for minorities, it's even worse.
Oh.
It's always worse for minorities. Literally anything we ever say on TikTok or the podcast, like, multiply it by 10 for minorities. It's awful. There's also unrealistic expectations for women, especially from the men, like what they would do if that was true. We'll go back to the abuse example. I would immediately leave a partner who abused me. The fact that she stayed with him makes me think that this is not, and this is the same for judges too. So any male judge, or female to some extent, but males tend to fall into it more. Another misconception: I can tell if someone's experienced violence by the way they act when discussing the abuse. There's all these misconceptions that tend to play in the male's favor. Here's another example of just about this particular, like, sexual assault stuff. Allegation of Bill Cosby's drugging and sexually assaulting women, that it circulated around for years. but no legal action is taken until years and years later when a male comedian, calls out Cosby for raping women. And that's how the whole thing went down.
Whoa.
It's because a male comedian talked about it. Women had been talking about it for many years. Mm-hmm. Nothing. Students rate the same online professor as more competent when they believe that a professor is a man versus when they believe that a professor is a woman. I just heard that loud swallow. I don't know if anybody else did. A 2016 study published by Yale found that both men and women implicitly associate male with rationality and thinking, and female with emotionality and feeling. Gender credibility gap is more pronounced in male-dominated industries. Of course.
Okay.
Very pronounced in finance and insurance, where, by the way, the pay gap is the largest.
Really?
Yes. Women make around 61 cents on the dollar. Also, STEM is a big one. Same thing with political media, which is part of the problem with the credibility gap, too, is we look like on media and stuff like that. A lot of times it's men that have the authority, perceived authority, that are speaking in to what's going on in the world. There's not as much female representation. And if there is, a lot of times it's not a solo person. It's part of a panel or part of a group. Mm-hmm. And that person's there for a very specific reason. It's not as common for women to have a free mic. Now, there are women who have broken through, absolutely. But I also feel like those women are caricatures. They're meant to be extreme. They're not just general reporting.
Right, like on the right, you have like an Ann Coulter.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
I can't think one on the left right now, but
yes, there's these extremists.
I feel like pundits on TV, particularly on the news, making talking points on the left or on the right, just they don't flesh it out and give the proper definitions, and you're not educating enough. You're just have talking points that are polarizing.
You're sensationalizing.
You're sensationalizing, but you're not educating enough. And I'm not saying that those active in the Me Too movement or the Black Lives Matter movement didn't do that, but I'm saying who I saw at least was getting the most airtime. And maybe they just didn't give enough time to educate. I don't know. But there's not enough education going.
But there needs, just like with our TikToks, if I'm watching the, 10 o'clock news, mm-hmm. I want to know where you're getting your info. Especially if you're talking about something like as big as Me Too. Like these things that have statistical foundations of which we can build arguments. Like, why are we not discussing in detail about these definitions and these statistics and these studies?
You don't get ratings, maybe?
Yeah, probably not. So the challenge that I have to you and men is to ask women you are close to about their experiences with the gender credibility gap without interrupting them or dismissing their stories. Ask them if the gender credibility gap resonates with them and if they have personal stories to share. And the floodgates will open. I took that challenge from a TED Talk that talks about this exact issue, and I thought it was a great challenge. Well, I think that's going to conclude our podcast because we're real people and we have to get our kids up from a nap.
Yet again, thank you for being open enough to listen to. Maybe you're listening and this has not been your perspective, but at least you're open to learning new information. That's important, and I respect that a lot. Stay educated. Take the pink pill. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give us a follow. For shorter form content, follow us on TikTok at Caters88.